The drive to Ottawa took 4 hours, and I spent most of it with the radio off. I didn't want music. I didn't want talk. I just wanted the hum of the 417 in the flat gray sky above the trees, because if I filled the silence, I might start rehearsing what I was going to say when I walked through my parents' door. And I had promised myself, years ago, in a different life, that I was done rehearsing for them. My brother's engagement party was that Saturday. My mother had called 3 weeks before to remind me, which told me everything I needed to know about how she expected the evening to go. Not "I can't wait to see you." Not "it's been too long." Just the address, the time, and "please don't wear something that makes you look tired. People will be there." People. That's what she called guests. People who mattered. I had moved to Toronto 6 years earlier, right after I finished my master's degree at Carleton. I told my parents it was for work, which was true. What I didn't tell them was that work had become everything, in a way I couldn't fully explain, and still can't, not entirely. I had taken a position with Health Canada that was, on paper, unremarkable. Policy coordination, cross-departmental liaison, the kind of title that makes people's eyes go politely vacant at dinner parties. My mother had a talent for those polite vacancies. "So, you're still in the government," she would say each time I came home. Not a question, a verdict. Said the same way you'd say, "So you're still renting," or "So you never did go back for that other degree." My father was quieter about it, which was almost worse. He had opinions that lived behind his eyes, fully formed, never quite spoken, which meant you could never argue against them. My brother, I'll call him by what he's always been to me, which is the one who could do no wrong, had just been accepted to the University of Ottawa's medical program when I left. He was 22. My parents had rented a hall for that news, an actual hall. 60 people in a catered dinner from the Lebanese place my father loved. My mother had worn her good earrings. When I got my federal posting, she made pasta. I'm not saying this to be bitter. I'm saying it because it's true, and because for a long time I thought the difference in how they treated us was something I had done, or failed to do, or had simply been born wrong for. It took me years to understand that some families have a favorite child, the way some houses have a favorite room, the one they keep clean for company, the one where the real living happens, and the other rooms are just there, functiontum, closed off. You don't think about them much. I parked on the street outside my parents' house on a Friday night. The lights were on. My sister-in-law-to-be's car was already in the driveway, which meant the family dinner had started without me, which meant I was late, which would be noted. My mother opened the door before I knocked. "You cut your hair," she said. "Hi, Mom." It looked better longer. She turned and walked back to the kitchen. I stepped inside, closed the door, and stood for a moment in the hallway where my brother's hockey photos still lined the wall in matching frames. There were no photos of me on that wall. There had been one, once, my convocation from Carleton, but it had been moved to the upstairs hallway to make room, my mother said, for a new print she'd bought at a craft fair in Perth. The print was of a barn. Dinner that night was my mother's roast chicken, which she made for important occasions, and everyone was warm and easy with each other in the way that only happens when you're not the variable in the room. My brother talked about his residency, his fiancée. She was lovely, genuinely lovely, the kind of person who asks follow-up questions and actually listens to the answers. Talked about the wedding venue they'd booked in Gatineau. My father asked questions and laughed at the right moments. At some point my mother said, almost as an aside, "The way you drop something into a conversation to see if it lands, Simone is still with Health Canada, doing the, 'What is it you do again, Simone?'" She knew what I did. She had known for 6 years. "Policy work," I said. "Policy," she repeated, nodding slowly. "Right." A small pause. "Your cousin Bridget just made partner at her firm. Did I tell you that? 31 years old." I said that was great. I meant it. Bridget had worked incredibly hard. "It's just, you know." My mother gestured vaguely at me. "You were always so bright. We just thought." Another pause. A specific kind of pause. One she had perfected over decades, that managed to say, "I'm not criticizing, I'm just wondering," while meaning something else entirely. Anyway, More chicken? I took more chicken. My father looked at his plate. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea I didn't really want, and looked at the backyard through the sliding glass door. The yard was dark. There was a bird feeder out there that my father had built when I was in high school, and I could just make out its shape against the fence. I used to watch him build it. I thought back then that quiet moments like that meant something, that a father who built bird feeders on Sunday afternoons was a father who was present in a way that counted. I was 31 years old, sitting in my parents' kitchen at midnight, and I was starting to understand that presence and approval are not the same thing. I had spent 6 years doing work that I could not fully describe to anyone, including the people I loved, not because it was classified, though parts of it were, but because the nature of federal public health infrastructure is so unsexy, so deliberately invisible, that to describe what I actually did felt like handing someone a novel and watching their eyes skip straight to the last page. What I did lived in the space between systems, in the agreements that got signed before anyone knew they were needed, in the protocols that looked like bureaucratic boilerplate until the moment they were the only thing standing between a regional health authority and complete collapse. During the pandemic, I had worked 18-hour days for 14 months straight. I am not saying this for sympathy. I am saying it because my mother called me 3 times during those 14 months, and 2 of those times were to tell me about my brother's progress, and once was to ask if I was eating enough vegetables. She did not ask what I was doing. She did not ask if I was okay. I don't think it occurred to her that anything I was doing mattered enough to ask about. The engagement party the next evening was held at a restored heritage venue in the Glebe, beautiful place. Exposed brick and warm Edison lighting, the kind of room that makes everyone look like they're doing well. There were about 70 guests, my parents' friends, my brother's colleagues from the hospital, his fiancée's family, who were warm and loud and kept insisting I take more of the appetizers. I was doing fine. That is the honest version of what I was doing. I was fine. I was holding my glass of sparkling water. I don't drink at family events. I learned that a long time ago, and having a genuinely nice conversation with my future sister-in-law's aunt about her garden in Westboro when my mother materialized at my elbow. She had someone with her, a woman in her 60s, silver-haired, excellent posture, the kind of bearing that makes a room subtly rearrange itself without anyone noticing why. "Simone," my mother said, "this is Dr. Hartwell. She's the chief medical officer for the region. We're on the hospital foundation board together." Dr. Hartwell put out her hand, and I shook it. "And what do you do, Simone?" she asked. The question was genuine, interested. She had one of those faces that listens. I started to answer. I said something like I work in federal health policy, and my mother, smiling, speaking lightly, as if she were simply filling in helpful context, said, "She processes reports. For Health Canada. It's mostly administrative." There was a small silence. Dr. Hartwell's eyes moved from my mother's face to mine. Something shifted in them. "I'm sorry," she said. "What did you say your last name was?" "Beaumont," I said. "Simone Beaumont." She looked at me for a long moment, and then she said very quietly, almost to herself, "The Emergency Coordination Framework, the 2021 rollout." I didn't answer. "That was you," she said. "It wasn't a question." My mother laughed a little, uncertain. "Simone is in administration, she." "Dr. Beaumont," said Dr. Hartwell, and she said it the way you say something when you want to make sure the correct information has been received by every person in earshot. "Designed the federal provincial protocol that kept our regional health system from collapsing in the 3rd wave. I watched our entire ICU situation change in 72 hours because of a framework that came out of her office." She paused. "We've been trying to find out who to thank for 2 years. The conversation nearby had quieted. I don't think anyone was trying to eavesdrop. It was just that Dr. Hartwell's voice carried the way voices do when they're used to rooms that require them to carry. My mother's smile had gone somewhere. I couldn't quite find it. My father had turned from the conversation he'd been having and was looking at us. His face did something I hadn't seen it do before. I don't have a precise word for it. It wasn't pride exactly. It was closer to the expression you make when you realize you have been reading a map upside down for a very long time. I had a team, I said. Because I did. I always want to be clear about that. What I built with people who worked just as hard and got even less recognition, and I won't take sole credit for something that was never mine alone. You led it, said Dr. Hartwell. And you were what, 28 at the time? 27. She shook her head slowly. Then she turned to the general room, not dramatically, not as a performance, just with the simple authority of someone who has spent decades knowing that what she says in a room tends to matter. And she said to no one in particular and everyone simultaneously, "Does her family know what she actually does?" I thought about the pasta dinner when I got my posting, the barn print in the upstairs hall, the chicken last night, and the pause and your cousin Bridget made partner. I took a sip of my sparkling water. They're learning, I said. What happened after is hard to describe. Not because it was dramatic. It wasn't, not in the way films are dramatic, but because the thing that happened was subtle, and subtle things are harder to hold on to. My mother came to find me about 20 minutes later while I was getting my coat from the cloakroom. She stood in the doorway, and she said my name, and when I turned around she had an expression I recognized from early childhood, from the times when she had said something she wished she could take back but couldn't quite bring herself to address directly. "Dr. Hartwell speaks very highly of you," she said. "She doesn't really know me," I said. "She knows my work." "They're the same thing, aren't they?" I looked at my mother. She is a small woman. She always seemed larger when I was young. "Sometimes," I said, "with some people." She nodded. Something sat between us that neither of us knew how to name. I don't think she's a cruel woman. I think she built a story about who her children were and what they were worth, and she told that story so many times it became the only story she could see. That's not cruelty. It's something quieter and harder to fix. "I should have asked more questions," she said. "About what you do." "Yeah," I said, "you should have." And then I put on my coat and I hugged her, briefly and genuinely, because she is still my mother. And I went and found my future sister-in-law and congratulated her and told her the venue was beautiful and that I was genuinely happy for her and my brother. And I meant every word of that. I drove back to the hotel I'd booked on Elgin Street. I had stopped staying in my childhood bedroom years ago, and it was one of the best decisions I've ever made for my own mental health. And I sat on the edge of the bed and I thought about the drive up, the flat gray sky, the radio silence, all the rehearsed things I had prepared to say and then decided not to. I hadn't said any of them. Something better had happened instead. I opened my laptop and checked my work email, because that's the kind of person I am, and there were 11 new messages, most of them unremarkable, and one from the Deputy Minister's office about a briefing I had been asked to lead in 3 weeks. I answered that one first. Then I closed the laptop, turned off the light, and for the first time in longer than I can remember, I fell asleep before midnight without going over the evening in my head, looking for the places where I had said the wrong thing or failed to say the right one. There was nothing to go over. For once, everything that needed to be understood had been understood without me having to explain it. That's a strange kind of quiet when you finally find it, not the quiet of being invisible, the quiet of not needing to be seen, because you already know what you are, and somewhere in a restored brick room in the Glebe, on a Saturday night, a few other people had finally started to figure it out too. I keep thinking about the bird feeder. My father built it when I was maybe 14 on a Sunday afternoon in our Ottawa backyard, and I stood at the sliding glass door and watched him measure and sand and fit the pieces together without saying much. I thought that meant something back then. I thought a father who spent a Sunday afternoon building something careful and quiet was a father who understood that some things deserve patience. What I didn't understand yet was that patience for a project and patience for a person are not the same thing. You can be meticulous about wood and completely careless about what you make someone believe about themselves over the course of 20 years. I don't think my parents are bad people. I've spent a long time sitting with that question, and I keep arriving at the same place. They're not bad people. They built a story about which of their children was going somewhere, And they told that story so consistently that it became invisible to them, just the way things were, not a choice they were making. But the effect of an unconscious decision is still a decision. My mother saying she processes reports at a party full of people who respected her opinion. That landed somewhere. It always lands somewhere. What Dr. Hartwell did that night wasn't dramatic. She didn't make a speech. She just said what was true in a room where the truth hadn't been allowed to take up much space before. And the reason it mattered, the reason the whole room shifted, wasn't because of status or titles or anything that can be put on a business card. It was because I had actually done something, not for recognition, not to prove anyone wrong, because it was the work in front of me and it needed to be done well and I was capable of doing it well, so I did. That's the part nobody talks about in these kinds of stories. The long middle part. The 14-month stretch during the pandemic when I was answering emails at 2 in the morning and nobody outside my team knew my name. The years of understanding systems so deeply that I started to see the places where they were fragile before anyone else did. That kind of work doesn't come from wanting to impress people. It comes from something quieter, a sense of responsibility that doesn't ask for an audience. I think about the people I've met who do their best work in exactly that way, and they all share something. They're honest with themselves about what they don't know. They don't perform competence, they build it. And they keep going when it's unglamorous, when it's unrewarded, when the people who are supposed to be proud of them are busy being proud of someone else. That's the thing I'd want anyone to take from Simone's story and from my own, which are not so different in the ways that matter. The outcomes, a room going quiet, a respected person saying your name with weight behind it, those are real and they're worth something. But they're downstream of choices made in private. The choice to keep learning, the choice to be honest in your work even when dishonesty would have been easier, the choice to stay in the room, literally and otherwise, when every instinct says it's not worth it. My mother asked, later that night, if they were the same thing, a person and their work. I said sometimes. With some people. I think what I meant was, when you've spent enough years building something real, quietly, without an audience, eventually the work and the person become hard to separate. Not because you've lost yourself in it, because you've found yourself through it. Through the discipline of doing it right, the integrity of doing it honestly, the persistence of doing it even when the people you love most don't think it counts. The bird feeder is probably still in that backyard. I hope the birds still use it. Some things are worth building even when nobody is watching.